treatment. The UN Special Rapporteur has called for a ban on solitary confinement for anything longer than 14 days. Anything longer than 14 days is called tantamount to torture. The United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva has unequivocally condemned solitary confinement as a degrading, inhuman form of abuse. We hold the world's largest number of people in solitary confinement. I'm not going to go into the various negative physiological and psychological reactions that individuals have to solitary confinement. I'm sure that my panelists will be able to speak, in one case from personal experience, to the effects the solitary confinement can have on a person. I do want to say the ACLU has been very strong in opposing the use of solitary confinement or the placement of solitary confinement, particularly on juveniles. And so Sonia can speak to that, with her excellent work in the state of Maryland on juveniles and why solitary confinement is so dangerous and so harmful for juveniles. While adults who are broken by the system at least have had the time to develop fully mentally and psychologically, oftentimes children's brains are still developing, and thus the effect of solitary confinement on them can be particularly harmful and particularly dangerous. Not surprisingly, the suicide rates are notably higher for individuals in solitary confinement. Nationally, about 50% of concluded suicides occur among the 2 to 8% of prisoners housed in solitary confinement. In California, for example, although that less than 10% of the state's population was in isolation, those units accounted for 73% of all suicides. How do people end up in solitary confinement? They generally fall into one of three categories. It's what's called protective custody, individuals, oftentimes children, who are placed there supposedly for their own protection. People who file complaints and otherwise annoy staff, people who are deemed to be disciplinary problems, they're placed in what's called administrative segregation. And then people who are placed in solitary confinement often as a punishment. There's a great Frontline documentary, I was rewatching it this weekend, about solitary confinement in the Maine system. And once you go into solitary confinement, just to sort of talk about one example, it affects you. You want to be able to get out of the cell. You want to be able to do anything that'll get you out of the cell. So oftentimes people resort to self-harm, cutting themselves, attempting to hang themselves. And oftentimes when these people engage in these activities while they're in solitary confinement, they're not given treatment, rather they're punished with more solitary confinement. So it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle once individuals are placed there.